Water Quality Improvement Advisory Committee. And if the clerk would call the roll, item number 2 on the agenda.
Chair Moldaver? Here. Mr. Bullock?
Here.
Ms. Lomas? Ms. Weber? Here. Mr. Schluter? Here. And Mr. Wilson, Ms. Self, Mr. Hockman, and Mr. Jordan are not here.
Yeah, I'd like to know for the record that Mr. Wilson has taken French leave and is in the South Seas. That would bring us to item number 3, approval of the draft minutes of the December 16th meeting. Are there any corrections, additions, or amendments to the draft minutes? Roger?
On top of page 2, there's a closing sentence about the discussion or the open presentation by Mr. and Mrs. Rosenfeld. And if I remember correctly, there was some discussion afterward on the part of the committee in support of them or the general ideas they were presenting, and that's not included there. So my suggestion is, and I may be wrong, but my suggestion is go back and take a look at the tape, and if there was a discussion, add just a sentence or two to capture the essence of that discussion. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Roger. Was that in response to public comment?
Yes.
I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that advisory boards and commissions have received guidance from the city attorney's office about the level of specificity of response or encouragement that we can give upon the immediate receipt of public comment, because in the past, I believe another city advisory committee was challenged on their due process behavior. So there's nothing wrong with saying a little bit more about what their point was, but how the committee reacted to it, except to encourage them to pursue appropriate action within the city. I think we have to be careful how we express that. But your point is well taken. Are there any other additions or corrections? Is there a motion to approve the minutes as augmented by Mr. Schluter?
So approved.
Is there a second? Second. All right, it's been moved and seconded to accept the draft minutes as amplified by Mr. Schluter. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? All right, the minutes are unanimously approved. That brings us to item number 4, adjustments to the agenda. Mr. Benson, are there any adjustments to be made to the published agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any adjustments per se, but I did have a couple of announcements I wanted to make, and namely that there were 2 items at City Council yesterday that I wanted to let the committee know about. The first was a donation from Whole Foods Market, which just opened up in town a few months ago, and they made a $5,000 donation to the Creeks Advisory Committee and the work of the committee. And when any part of the city receives a donation like that, it goes to the City Council to be accepted and appropriated. And so we were there yesterday, and the council accepted the funds. So we have that money available for the work of the committee, and we can, at the committee's desire, put something on a later agenda to discuss what the appropriate use of the funds would be. But I wanted to let you know about that. And then the second thing is, the second thing on the council agenda yesterday was a grant that the Creeks Division received from the Water Environment Research Foundation for $27,000, and this is a grant that it goes to a program that's part of our larger microbial source tracking research that we're working on with UCSB. And this is a grant that will partially fund UCSB for some additional microbial source tracking or DNA source tracking research, in addition to bringing a dog from Michigan that's been trained to sniff out human waste in storm drain systems. And the dog has the ability to distinguish human waste compared to other kinds of background smells in the drains, and can have an instantaneous results and go up the storm drain and actually try to find the sources so that we can stop the sources. So what we'll be doing is sort of testing the dog's ability and then also pulling samples that will be tested in the lab with the DNA-based sampling techniques, and that will become part of our microbial source tracking research and our protocol development that we're working on with the Clean Beaches Initiative grant that we have from the state. I think I just want to let you know about both of those things at council yesterday. So I think that's it for announcements.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benson. Roger?
Can I ask a question about that? Does the $5,000 go into this year's operating budget?
Yes.
Yeah. Natasha?
This dog, is it going to be owned by the city, or is it on loan?
No, we're not buying the dog. We're buying the service, and the dog and its trainer will be coming out in June. We'll be letting you know. We actually have some opportunities for the public to meet the dog. The trainer's going to come out and talk about the work that he's been doing around the country. As far as we could tell, this is the only dog that's been used for this purpose. Obviously, dogs have been used for similar types of purposes with law enforcement and narcotics and explosives and things like that. And this is a potential public health use for that kind of sniffing ability. And it has potential for us to be used in the future in that you can get instant results as compared to waiting several weeks or even months for lab results for those kinds of tests. And your per sample cost goes way down, and your ability to actually find a source, because you can, you find the presence of the contamination, and then you can keep moving on that same day up the drain until you find the source, as compared to waiting weeks or months to get your lab results and then going back and trying to move your way up and find the source.
Yeah. Thank you for those good questions. That brings us to item number 5, public comment. Under the Ralph M. Brown Act, any member of the public may address the committee for up to 1 minute on any subject within our jurisdiction that is not already on today's published agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to bring any issue forward? All right. Hearing none, that brings us to item number 6, committee member and staff communication. And I thought, if Mr. Benson concurs, that the most important communication we've had is from the City Council, that we've added a fantastic new member to the committee, and this is her first official meeting. So what I was thinking is, maybe for the benefit of our new member, we could start over here with Natasha. We could introduce ourselves to you, and then maybe you could say a couple of words about yourself and your interests and your background. And that would not only get committee member Weber off to a good start, but it also give kind of a human picture of the committee to the people who are watching at home. So, Natasha?
Do you want me to include background and all that, or no?
Just a couple sentences.
My name is Natasha Lomas, and I work for the Department of Fish and Game, environmental scientist. and ex-game warden, and work with Steelhead Restoration.
And I'm Lee Moldaver and lived here for a long time, and I do consulting in the technology field for new product development. And Natasha forgot to mention that she's a splendid artist, in case you've never seen her things at group shows.
I'm going to hire him.
And I'm Paul Bullock. I work for the Eagle Inn. I'm the lodging industry representative on this committee.
So I'm Betsy Weber, and I'm the communications director at the Environmental Defense Center. I've been there for about 3 years, and prior to that, I worked in Sheridan, Wyoming, at the Wyoming Wilderness Association, and was just kind of got involved with this through Cameron and also Brian Troutwine at EDC.
My name is Roger Schluter. I'm just a public representative.
But also a man of many signal attainments, the greatest of which is modesty. All right, and thank you and welcome aboard, Betsy. It's very exciting. Are there any other staff communications? All right, that brings us to item number 7, subcommittee reports. And since the last regular meeting, we had a meeting, as Roger knows, of the budget subcommittee, and I think Mr. Benson is going to give a brief overview of what transpired there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll give a quick report. We had our first budget subcommittee meeting of the year on January 29th. Chair Moldaver, Mr. Schluter, and Mr. Wilson were present, and I'll just quickly go over kind of the big picture of what we talked about. First, I gave a report on the current fiscal year's budget, which we just received revised revenue estimates for the current fiscal year. And although the original projections at the beginning of the fiscal year had our revenue projections down from the prior year, now the projection for FY10 is about 9.5% below the FY9 revenue numbers. So we were adjusted downward. That was something we were expecting. So because we watch those numbers every month, and so we were already working on cost-cutting measures and have looked forward for the remainder of this fiscal year. And cut where we could in our operating budget to make sure that we kept the budget balanced for this fiscal year. And then moving to our FY11 budget, this is very early in the process, and I wanted to sit down with the committee and just talk about broad themes. Like the current year's budget, we are the biggest issue or change in our budget over the last couple of years is that we've been increasing the dollar amount that we're supplying to our capital program and the projects that we're constructing around the city. And so I think when we actually get into the numbers and we look at line-by-line numbers, you'll see that we're really trying to tighten up our costs with regard, or our expenses with regard to our operating budget, and we're really focusing a lot of the Measure B dollars on projects to improve water quality and restore the creeks in the city. So I think I'll leave it at that unless anybody has any specific questions. And then as we move forward, we will have 1 or 2 additional budget subcommittee meetings. And then actually there is one additional detail I wanted to bring up. Looking ahead to our April meeting, which is currently scheduled for April 14th, I'd like to survey the committee and see if you would all agree to move that to April 21st so that we can have our budget discussion with the full committee on that date. And that date works because the whole city budget will be presented to City Council on April 20th, and then we can come to the committee and focus on the Creeks Division budget at that time.
So it's just a coincidence that would bring it more in line with Earth Day as well. Are there any objections for those of you who have your calendars here for moving the meeting back 1 week? All right, so why don't we take it for now that the date change would be acceptable, and I imagine we'll notify Mr. Wilson when he returns. Are there any other things to report on from communications or? There was one communication to the committee and the staff, which took place last month, and as some of you know, our liaison from the City Council for 2 or 3 years was Ea Falcone, who just retired. And she's been replaced by a new member of the City Council, Mrs. Michael Self. So Councilwoman Self was not able to be here today, but she will be representing the City Council at our future meetings. So that's also a bit of exciting news. That brings us to item 8 on the agenda, election of a chair for the 2010 year. So I guess what we do is see if there are any nominations to be chair, and of course that's followed, by vice chair. So, and anyone who's interested in either position, this would be a great time to speak up. Well, if that were in the form of a motion, then we might be able to get a second.
Do you want to?
Oh, I'd be willing to do it again if.
Well, then I recommend Lee Mulwither.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second? All right, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any other nominations for chair? I know Committee Member Wilson, who's been a member for a long time, was so terrified of the chance that he might get selected that he chose to get married and put about 7,000 miles distance between himself and the election process. But he's tried to prove otherwise. Are there any other nominations for chair? All right. In that case, the nominations are closed, and all those in favor of electing Lee as chair for the coming year signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? I'll abstain. Thank you very much. And that brings us to item number 9, the election of the vice chair. I should point out for the newer members of the committee that this is more than an honorary position. Traditionally, the vice chair will spend the current year training and sitting in on most of the subcommittee meetings with the expectation that at this meeting next year they will move up. And the reason that it's open now was that our previous vice chair, Michael Jordan, did such a good job in that position that the City Council selected him to move up to the Planning Commission. So unfortunately, just when we were hoping to inaugurate him today for our committee, a rival group within the city family has already snagged him. So with that in mind, that you'd be on the committee and hopefully would serve as chair next year, are there any nominations for vice chair? Roger?
In order to foil Mr. Wilson, I nominate him for vice chair.
Yeah. All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Mr. Wilson has been nominated. Are there any other nominations? Roger?
I do have a question, though. Do you know, in fact, that Daniel is willing to take the job? Do you have any idea on that?
I think Mr. Benson may know more, but I think what he had indicated was that between the economy and getting married, that he's going to have to reassess when he comes back from his honeymoon rested and relaxed how much time he's going to be able to devote to the committee this year. And I know that had been weighing on his mind, I mean, joking aside, even before he left on his honeymoon. So Cameron may know more.
Yeah. Well, I've heard the same thing, and I expect that, it might not be the best idea to nominate him and put him in that position in his absence. I also know that his term expires at the end of this calendar year, and for the reasons that Lee mentioned, I'm not sure that he's going to reapply.
In light of both of those, which I think are important, I'd withdraw the nomination.
Well, Natasha, are you interested in serving as vice chair?
I have to respectfully decline. I still new myself.
Well, but it's all one big happy family, and there's a lot to be said for. Well, I'm not even going to say that at a televised meeting, but are there any other nominations, or I guess we can hold that open till the next meeting? Paul?
If my arm's being twisted, I will do it. I mean, you'll need to teach me the ropes.
I think one of the things you just learned is that our new committee member, Betsy Weber, has telekinetic power, and when she was staring at you just now with a big smile, that's why your arm was going back behind you. Can we make that more formal in the sense of a nomination? Yeah. Such as, I'd like to nominate Paul Bullock as vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Paul Bullock as vice chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Wonderful. All right. Paul's been nominated for vice chair. You are willing to serve? All right. In that case, let's close nominations, and all those in favor of electing Paul as vice chair for the Creeks Committee for 2010, with the hope and expectation that you'll move up as chair in 2011. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions?
I'll abstain.
All right. Congratulations, Paul. You've now been elected, and that completes item number 9. Brings us to item number 10, subcommittee appointments. And for the benefit of our new committee member, Betsy, and our recent committee members, Paul and Natasha, Mr. Betsy, can you go over the standing and ad hoc committees and where the vacancies are, so that people could decide what they're most interested in?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So since the inception of this committee, we've set up subcommittees to work on discrete and specific issues involving water quality improvement and creek restoration. There are two types of committees. We have standing committees, which are permanent committees. They're Brown Act committees, so we notice all of the meetings to the public. And we have ad hoc committees, and those are set up as temporary committees that are set up to work on a specific issue for a defined period of time. Once the issue that the committee is working on is complete, the committee generally is dissolved, and we move forward and create ad hoc committees as necessary. So currently we have one standing committee, and that's our budget subcommittee. That committee meets, generally speaking, 2 to 3 times a year. As I said, that's a Brown Act committee, so we notice the meetings, and they're of course open to the entire committee, is welcome to attend, as well as the public. But the committee is made up of a minority or the subcommittee is made up of a minority of this committee, which is the entire committee is a 7-member committee, so that's a 3-member committee. And then we have 2 ad hoc subcommittees. One is our Outreach and Education Subcommittee, and the purpose of that committee is to revise and update our public education plan, and that is in progress right now, and actually will be presented to the full committee at the March meeting. And that and the other ad hoc committee is the Watersheds Subcommittee, and the focus of that committee right now is to participate in the city's general plan update, the Plan Santa Barbara process that's underway right now, and we're specifically looking at policy issues related to water quality and creek restoration. Each of those ad hoc committees meet as needed, at different decision points along the process, and then ultimately report back to the full committee what direction they're moving in and what recommendations they've made. So, generally speaking, the budget subcommittee has historically consisted of the chair of the committee, the vice chair of the committee, and one other member. And part of that is, particularly for the vice chairs, to make them familiar with the budgeting process, which is a significant oversight responsibility of this committee with this program. Current committee members are Mr. Schluter and Mr. Moldaver, and with the Watershed Committee, Outreach and Education Committee, the current members are Mr. Moldaver. The other two members have retired from the committee, and with the Watershed Subcommittee, Mr. Wilson is the only current member of this committee that's on there. So all the spots are open, but I don't know, for continuity's sake, if we want to keep, if the members of those committees are willing to stay on those subcommittees, I think that would be a good idea just for continuity's sake.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a great overview. So, first of all, let me ask Paul, as the new vice chair, would you be willing and able to serve on the budget subcommittee?
Yeah, sure, I can definitely do that.
All right. That means there would be one other vacancy in terms of tracking the dollars and posting up the projects and programs for the years to come. I know, Roger, you're doing it now. Would you be interested in continuing, or Betsy or Natasha, do you feel passionately about serving on the budget committee?
Definitely not.
All right, then let's indicate that Roger will continue to serve, and the budget committee will consist of myself, Paul Bullock, and Roger Schluter. In terms of the committee's interaction with Plan Santa Barbara, and make sure that planning and protection for the city's watersheds and water quality are built into the new general plan. Are there people here who are particularly interested or passionate about getting involved with that ad hoc committee, with the understanding it would meet as needed during the course of the year?
You're talking about the watershed?
Yeah.
I definitely would be interested in that.
All right. And Roger?
Do we need 3 on a subcommittee, or is 2 adequate?
Two.
2 is okay. I mean, we don't have to have 3. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And Betsy, did you, between this subcommittee and the education and outreach, did you have a interest or preference or a desire to do both?
Education and outreach.
Okay. And Roger?
Before we go there, I have a question on the education outreach. I'm not sure why we have a subcommittee for education outreach. We have a number of programs going on, and yet education and outreach is the only one that has a subcommittee. And I'm not sure why it is that why we need a subcommittee for that, and we don't need a subcommittee for all the other efforts that the Creeks Division carries on. So maybe you could explain why the recommendation that we keep that.
Mr. Benson?
Sure. The committee voted to create that subcommittee to work specifically on the public education plan update, and that's been a process. We've probably had 6 meetings to discuss that, and that's coming to a close soon. But depending on what happens at the March meeting and the committee's feedback, if we have to go back and make any kind of changes, we'd go back and reconvene that subcommittee to work on those issues until the education plan is complete. at that time, I think that the subcommittee could probably be dissolved.
Thank you, and that's why it's an ad hoc committee. All right, so we have a commitment from Betsy for education and Natasha for watersheds. Roger, do you have interest in serving on any subcommittees besides budget? And Paul?
I'd be interested in the outreach and education. Yeah, I can do that.
All right, that would be great. And I guess we can hold the other one open until Daniel returns. And of course, as Mr. Benson indicated, on any given committee meeting, every member of the committee is welcome to attend and listen and pose questions from the floor like any member of the public. But for quorum reasons, it has to be less than 4 members of the committee. So, it could be that we'll just come to the other ones. All right. So I guess we'll take those appointments for now, and we'll continue the last vacancy, let's say, until the next meeting, which would complete item number 10.
Mr. Chair, are you going to remain on the outreach and education?
Oh, yeah, I'd be willing to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Which would bring us to our main business item number 11.
Chair?
Mr. Sluter? Sure.
Do we need to replace Mr. Jordan on the IPM Advisory Committee?
Good question. Mr. Benson?
Both of those are there are two. Excuse, I neglected to mention these earlier. We have two committees within the city that we have a liaison to. One is the IPM Advisory Committee, and one is the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project Design.
For the benefit of new committee members and people at home, and the use of jargon, IPM stands for?
Yeah, excuse me. The IPM Advisory Committee is the Integrated Pest Management, and that is reflecting city policy to use least toxic alternatives to pesticides and herbicides throughout the city. And so what that committee does is it hears requests, generally discusses policy changes, and also hears requests for variances from the current policy, and reviews those requests and makes recommendations on them. The Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project Design Subcommittee is interagency committee within the city that provides comment and input into the design of the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project. The IPM Advisory Committee liaison was Mr. Jordan, and the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project Subcommittee liaison was Mr. Wilson.
Yeah. Thank you, Roger. Are there any of the committee members here who are interested in taking one of those positions?
I would ask if Natasha or Betsy have any experience, expertise, background, whatever, in pest management, that sort of thing.
Oh, I actually remember at the budget meeting that that whole issue was one that Mr. Wilson actually had expressed some interest in, because he works extensively as a professional in that field. On the other hand, in terms of arm twisting and telekinetic powers, I bet the Lower Mission Creek would be something if Brian Troutwine were here and could look through the TV camera at Betsy. I know he's hoping to get someone good. And I know Natasha has a lot of experience with Mission Creek Habitat. Are either of you interested in that?
Possibly.
Okay, so why don't we hold those two open until Mr. Wilson returns, and we can take this up again at our next meeting. But thank you for reminding us. That now brings us to item number 11, Mission Creek Fisk Passage update, and for the benefit of Ms. Weber, this is George Johnson, our senior creek supervisor, who does incredible things for the creek program when he's not out surfing and doing incredible things for the ocean. So, George?
All right, thanks for that good introduction. Again, my name's George Johnson, and then I'm going to be talking about the mission, the Steelhead Fish Passage project. As soon as it opens up here. And can I just click on that? Yeah, okay. This is, we'll first go over the project need for this particular project. This is a photo of a steelhead trout that we found dead in a pool a couple years ago. Unfortunately, it was a pretty big fish, and some of you might know that the steelhead is an endangered species, so that was pretty unfortunate to lose that because there's not very many of them left in the wild. But what is fortunate is that in the city, Mission Creek has some really good habitat for fish, and so the city is pursuing improving that habitat. And there's only the one main problem with the habitat in Mission Creek is that there are a number of barriers to steelhead migration. And so we're trying to correct that in this project. Project purpose, again, is to remove those barriers on Mission Creek, and the particular sites we're working on right now, removing the barriers at those locations would open up almost 4 miles of habitat, 2 of which is very good spawning habitat for the fish. Project partners, we have a lot of people helping us on this particular effort. We have the Flood Control District, with Department of Fish and Game, the National Marine Fisheries Service, or NOAA, their sub-agency, I guess, and then the Environmental Defense Center also has been instrumental in helping this, as well as the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board, or COMB is their acronym. There's 3 different project sites we're working on: the Caltrans Channel, Talent Road Bridge, and Highway 192. You can see a map here in the location. This is Mission Creek, or the main stem of it, going up to here. Right down here is Mission Lagoon next to Stearns Wharf, and that's where Mission Creek outlets. If you follow that up, the first significant barrier that the fish reach is the lower Caltrans Channel, and then the next one is the upper Caltrans Channel. The next project site is at the Talent Road Bridge at the upper end of Oak Park, and then you go all the way up to here, and there's the next significant barrier on the creek, which is at the Highway 192 bridge. So there are some other barriers further upstream, but this, again, would get us about 4 miles of new habitat, and 2 of which are good for spawning for the fish. This is a photo. We'll first start off talking about the Caltrans Channel. We'll go from the lower watershed up to the upper. As you can see, it's a concrete trapezoidal channel. It's very difficult for fish to get up through this channel because when the water is not flowing very high, like in this photo, it's too shallow for the fish to swim up. And when the flows come up to where there's proper depth for the fish, it flows too fast. For them to swim this section, this is 3/4 of a mile long, they just get too tired and they get swept back down to the pools down here where that first picture of that dead fish you saw are located, further downstream. So we did a bunch of conceptual design work to try to find out which design would best get fish up this concrete channel section. And the design that came up is we've labeled the side pockets design. This is a photo of the flume model testing we did. We got a grant to do some physical modeling of the channel. That's where you construct an actual scaled physical model. We did this up in a lab in Vancouver, Canada. And this is just a photo of the side pockets design. Basically, it's a low-flow notch cut into the existing concrete channel. It's about 4 feet wide, 2.5 feet deep. It's got these little resting areas or side pockets approximately every 40 feet, and then it's got a small little speed bump. You can see where the gravel here is kind of been caught behind it. That's just what's called a weir, and that's been put in to raise water depths. Here's a photo. We looked at 3 different fish passage criteria, or 3 different criteria, I should say, for each design. We looked at a number of different designs, and one was for fish passage, obviously. One was for sedimentation, and one is for flood elevations. And so the side pockets design performed the best out of all the alternatives we looked at. As you can see in this photo for fish passage, the ink is staying rather stationary while the water's moving by, so that indicates there's a good area for the fish to rest. And so we've got good resting areas for the fish on their way up during migration. The next slide shows the sedimentation. We ran sediment through the model, and it showed that we wouldn't have too much sediment, or it's estimated that we wouldn't have. There is some collection of sediment, but not enough to prohibit fish passage or create a big maintenance issue. And then flood elevations, which is very important. Well, we showed through the modeling that there would be no reduction in the channel capacity. So we've completed the conceptual designs. Now we're moving forward onto preliminary and final construction plans. We have design plans at 60% detail and a performance design memo due to us in about 2 weeks. And that's preliminary design. And then the performance design memo was done just so that we could double check the modeling we did in the conceptual design phase to make sure that this particular design is going to work as best possible. There's a lot of money in constructing it, and we want to get a good design. And so we looked at, did some additional, or the consultant, HDR Engineering, has done some additional computer modeling and some other things to look at the design. So far, they agree that it is a sound design and should pass fish well. But they do have a few small modifications that they're going to probably suggest as part of the design memo, maybe changing the channel depth, side pocket spacing, and then those weirs I talked about, they may want to change the shape or spacing of those weirs also. But overall, no big changes. It looks like it should work, and we look forward to looking at that memo and the design plans in a couple weeks. In terms of funding, the original conceptual design and modeling was funded through the Fish and Game and a grant from the Environmental Defense Center that got a grant from Annenberg Foundation. We were able to pay for over 90% of that modeling with grant funding. So we've been pretty successful in all these projects getting grant funding. We got another $500,000 grant from Fish and Game to do the final design work that we're in the middle of right now. And EDC is contributing $135,000 to that through an Annenberg grant. For construction, the estimated cost is about $2.6 million for phase one. I'll explain the phases next. CDFG grant request is we have $1 million to CDFG and NOAA for construction funding in right now. We don't know if that's been approved or not. And then we have about $600,000 in the Creeks Division capital budget for the project. So assuming we got those grants, we would have the funding available to construct phase one. Now, we've split the project into 2 phases, mostly for funding reasons to get grant funds. The first phase would be construction of the modifications in the upper channel, the smaller 1/4 mile segment, and then the second phase we would do a year after. It would be in the lower channel and the 3/4 mile segment. It also allows us a little time to review over that first winter how well the design works in the actual full-scale model, or full-scaled version. And the next steps for this particular project site is final design. We hope to have complete in June 2010. We are hoping to get CEQA permitting and also completed by August of 2010. And then construction, if all goes well, we might be able to start in August 2010, assuming we get grant funding. If not, it would be started in June. So we'll move on to the next site. This is the Talent Road Bridge. It's also a photo of the structure here. You can see it's about 8 feet from the bottom of this rock area all the way to the top of that. So it's a pretty big barrier to the fish. And then beyond that's another 80 to 100 feet of concrete that the fish has to swim over. The same issues apply. Where the concrete is, it's flat and pretty flat, and the water moves fast. It's hard for the fish to swim up. So if you look at this bump right here, also I want to notice that's a sewer line that's right in the middle of the creek. So the project proposal is to remove the concrete that you see there in the photo, and the rocks, move the sewer line closer to the bridge, and then construct riffles and pools and some weirs in the stream channel, and then notch the concrete apron under the bridge. And so here's a photo. It's a drawing, kind of computer representation of the channel of what it might look like after the project is complete. You can see the notch here. That's about 8 feet wide under the bridge, about 18 inches deep. You can kind of see the first weir, and you can better see the second weir. A weir is basically just a horseshoe-shaped rock structure, usually make it out of large rock. And it stabilizes the creek bed, and it also helps to form scour pools, resting areas for the fish below them. And then the riffles are these sections in between. They're just varied size rock it's kind of like a rock ramp, and the fish can swim up that much easier than they can a smooth concrete ramp. So that's pretty much it. I'll show this. This is just a little video of the design the consultant did. It shows some different perspectives of the Fish Passage project. They messed around with this at their own expense just because they got this new program, and so It's kind of fun. There's little fish in there in the pools, and you can kind of see what it'll look like once it's constructed. And this is that notch I was talking about in that first pool, the rock weir. Again, the pool's here. And that's it. Uh-oh, I played it again. I think I'm just going to move to the next slide. Sorry about that. The project status is the final design is we have 90% plans and draft specifications are complete. We're reviewing those right now. Environmental review is complete. Permitting is almost complete. We're just awaiting some administrative approval. Final design and permitting right now. We have a $50,000 grant from the CDFG, and we're using that to complete that, and that's going to be completed pretty soon. We estimate the cost for construction of this about $832,000. The CDFG, we have a grant proposal to them for $397,000. We were successful in obtaining $250,000 from NOAA for construction for this project, and we have $185,000 in the Creeks Division capital budget. So, assuming we get the CDFG grant, we have enough money to construct the project. The next steps are to complete final design. That should be done in March 2010, as well as the permitting should be done at the same time. And then construction in 2010, assuming we get some grant funding, and we'll move forward with that. As long as there's no issues with the fire runoff, that's another issue we're kind of monitoring. There's the burned area can increase sediment loads and things, and we may not want to do it in 2010. If we think that's an issue, wait for that to stabilize a little bit. But mostly grant funds are the deciding factor in that. If we do get them, we'll probably move forward in 2010. If not, 2011. Here's the Highway 192 bridge. Pretty similar to the Talent Road bridge, it's just not as big. This particular bump you see here is another line. It's a 36-inch water line, unlike the Talent Road project where we're going to remove it, the sewer line, and move it closer to the bridge. In this particular location, they're going to keep it in the same spot but lower it a little bit. And so we'll be able to remove all this concrete and stuff, and then again build some weirs and the riffles and the pools. This pool will be maintained. It just will be moved a little bit. And it says here that we're going to notch the concrete under there, but there is no concrete under the bridge. That's incorrect, so we won't have to do that. It's just a natural bed. This one I think will be a little easier to. It'll be a little less construction, but you have to work in a wet environment, so there's a few more issues associated with that. Anyway, right now we're at final design, 90% plans and specifications. Environmental review is pending. It's completed, but it's pending approval, and then permits, they've been submitted, but are also pending approval. And I just want to explain that in terms of final design, we got a grant, we being the city, from Fish and Game to do this final design. Right about when we got that grant, we were in communication with COM, or Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board, and they indicated that they needed to replace that water line underneath there. We weren't aware of that before. The city was originally going to move forward with constructing the project. Once we found that out, we talked to them and agreed that and with Fish and Game that we could use the grant funds to do the final design and then turn those over to COM to actually do the construction and permitting. So COM is responsible for funding it, constructing it, and getting the permits. So we just helped out with the design on that. Next steps, design will be complete in March 2010. All the environmental review and everything should be complete by March of next year, and then COM has indicated they want to construct the project in summer of 2011. The fish passage as well as water line replacement. So that's it. If you have any questions, just fire away, and thanks for your time.
Any questions from Roger? You want to?
I just have a couple of questions. Remind me again, George, of what the purpose of the weirs are.
The weirs, they stabilize the bed of the creek because they're big rocks, 2 to 4 tons.
In the
in the lower section. Yes, those weirs. They're speed bumps, and what they do is they just basically back up water so that at low flows, there's enough water depth in that low flow channel for the fish to swim up. They're about a foot high, and so that means we get almost a foot of depth so that the fish can have a place to swim during those lower events.
But doesn't that mean there's no water below the weir?
No, there would be water below the weir. In the natural sections, you usually have what's called a thalwag or a low-flow channel that naturally scours in the larger channel.
Yeah.
And so the fish use that to swim up. Then they get to this concrete thing, and it's flat, and it's this deep, and they can't swim. When you have that low-flow notch in there with the speed bumps, it provides the proper depth for them to be able to get up.
Okay, you're ahead of me. The second question I have is, how long is the notch at Talent Road?
I think that's about, it's anywhere between 30 and 40 feet. I think it's 8 feet wide, and it's as long as the bridge, full length of the bridge, so it's between 30 and 40
So you
feet.
don't think that we need a notch in there as well, apparently?
There is a notch in it.
Oh,
It's
there is.
an 8-foot wide notch, 18 inches deep, and there is 2 speed bumps or weirs in there also.
But they're not side pockets in
They're not side pockets,
And
no.
we don't- and you don't
because
think-
it's only about a 30 or 40 foot section,
That's what I
so
was
the
asking.
fish can scoot
All right,
through that.
all right. Then my last comment is, I think your estimate of timing on the Lower Creek is a little optimistic.
Good. So do we, but we're just shooting for it.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Paul?
Thanks, George. That was a nice presentation. You guys done a lot of work with lots of different agencies, so
Yeah.
good job.
It's been a lot of coordination.
Is this a one-off project? In other words, are there any other cities that have done fish channels similar to this in the Caltrans channel? Because it seems like to do all that design work, maybe there's some. Is there anything else that you've drawn from to come up with these designs?
Well, no, there's one other, it's a good question. It really hasn't been done before. That's the other reason this particular design's never really been tried out before, and that's why we wanted to do that performance design model and do some, performance design memo to do some additional modeling to test the design. There is one other channel in Corte Madera, I think, in Northern California that has kind of similar. It's a concrete channel. It's got some pools, and it's a little similar to this. But no, I'm not aware of any other city that's done this. And so it's kind of fun and interesting because of that. It's new, and again, we're doing that additional testing just to make sure that it works.
I would just add one thing to that. What we've seen in working with the state and federal agencies on this and their engineers and fish biologists is we're seeing a lot of interest from other places around the state and even around the country in this design. So people are looking at this and starting to say, hey, maybe we can do something like that on concrete channels in our rivers that we thought were impossible for fish to get through. So we're kind of pioneering that, and other people are watching it pretty closely.
So will these plans be available to other cities to copy, to purchase?
Well, I don't know if they'd need to purchase them, but they'd have to hire their own design engineers. But they could definitely. There's no copyright or trademark on them. They could use them freely.
Natasha?
I'd also like to add to that question that Southern California's streams are different than most of the rest of the states and the nation because we have very flashy water events. They'll dry in the summer, and they'll have huge water flows in winter, where a lot of the Northern California streams have water in them year-round. So we have to design them a little differently than some of the existing designs. So that's why they're experimenting with something that these kind of channels have been looked at for years in Northern California, Washington, and Oregon, but those designs, we already know they won't work down here. So, but my question is, as you were going through that nice little schematic on I noticed what looked like root wads in the pools.
Yes.
And so those are going to be used to keep the scour.
They'll be used for scour and just kind of protection in the pools for the fish.
Cool. All right.
So those will be included also as part of the design.
Great. Thank you.
Betsy, any questions or thoughts? Again, a good presentation. I'd like to ask you, you've been working on different aspects of this project on and off for 2 or 3 weeks now, at least.
2 or 3 weeks?
What?
Years, maybe?
I didn't want to say that. But what developments, as you put this report together and you're able to look back with some perspective, what do you think is the most interesting or surprising change in how the project has evolved from, let's say, where we were a year ago? I know you mentioned when the computer model started looking at it, and they're coming up with some recommendations slightly different than the physical model up in BC. Were there any other things like that that really caught your attention for where you thought we'd be when you first started working on this?
No, I just, I think the one thing is that I think originally, looking at the computer modeling for the Caltrans channel, we had all these different designs, and when the first ones didn't work, we were kind of at a loss as to what was going to happen. And then actually at that point, I was a little skeptical whether they would be able to find something that would work. And so that was kind of a neat part of it, that we did find an option that is showing, at least through all the modeling we're doing, that it should work, and that other people are looking at it and they think that it'll work also. So that's been kind of exciting. I think the recent validation from the other consultant, HDR, that this design is sound was good news and kind of exciting. And then in terms of some of the other projects, just the sewer line removal was kind of a nice project in the Talent Road, the relocation, because originally we were just going to leave it there and try to work around it. Now we're moving it, and that kind of developed in the last year. We were able to do that where before we didn't think it was feasible. So those are maybe the two things I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, and your liaison with National Marines Fisheries, are you working with Mark or with somebody else?
No, we work with the permitting agencies and then a couple design engineers at NOAA. One in Northern California and one here in Southern California, David Crowder in Southern California, and then Matt McGugan, who does the permitting and helps us with that stuff.
Yeah, because I know Mark is with NIMS, here in the Balboa building, but his usual purview is slightly different. So
yeah, he's working more on the recovery plan effort.
Right. Okay, and Roger, you had one more question?
Yeah, regarding the innovative nature of this, did the firm that did the physical modeling write any papers about that project?
I don't know if they talked to me about writing a paper, but they did do a presentation last year at one of the national fish conferences on this particular project design. So they did do that. I don't know if they wrote any published paper, scientific paper on it.
If not, or even if they did, when you get near the completion of this project, I would encourage you to jointly author some papers on this, because it is innovative.
Right.
And if it works, then we want to be able to spread that knowledge around. If it doesn't, we want to spread that knowledge around.
Also, yeah, all right, good suggestion.
I would just add one thing to that. George has been asked and has provided presentations to a lot of different groups of engineers, and also we did a conference call where we had probably 24 different agencies represented from throughout the state. They participated in a conference call, and it was actually something where they were able to upload a PowerPoint presentation onto the computer, so everyone could sit in their office but see the slides and be able to visualize what the design looked like. And so we had a lot of good questions and a lot of good feedback from doing that.
Okay. Thanks again, George,
all right.
for item number
You're
11. Really appreciate the hard work. That brings us toward item number... Oh, Okay, and then please come up to the microphone and list your name for the record, and then give your question or your comment.
Okay, my name is Rick Frickman. I'm here representing Santa Barbara Urban Creeks Council and also myself. On behalf of the Urban Creeks Council, we urge you to move forward with all deliberation on this. We think this is very important for the environment and the creeks. And as speaking for myself, I just a little short story. My dad got some property in the 70s on Rattlesnake Creek, just above the point where it joins Mission Creek. And there was a large pool, maybe the size of this table that you're sitting at, and it had 4 rainbow trout in it, 8 to 10 inches. And we figured, oh, they must have been stocked there from before. But he grew fond of those, and he would feed them cheese and bits of meat. But in the late 70s, we had the drought, and the creek dried up, and that pond was getting smaller and smaller. My dad called California Fish and Game and said, what should I do with the fish? And they said, well, just catch them and eat them. There's really nothing you can do. Well, he caught them, but instead of eating them, because he was fond of them, he took them down to Alice Keck Park. And so I don't know what became of them after that, but there were 4 trout down there. The point of the story is that's just above the 192 construction or project. So there is the habitat right there, and there were historic fish there. So, yes, I would love to see them come back. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments. And, the Urban Creeks Council has been such a vital and resourceful partner all the way back to the origin of the ballot measure that created the funding source in this committee. And Mr. Troutwine and Wanda Mikolenko and Eddie Harris and, it's a great group of people that don't receive enough recognition. So we really welcome your comments and your insight and your support, and also your patience for sitting through the earlier part of the meeting to get here. Yeah, thank you very much. And that does bring us down towards item number 12. And you'll notice on the back of your agenda packet, it's proposed that the next meeting would be on Wednesday, March 10th. So if it turns out you discover your schedule is changing, please contact me or our Creek staff at your early convenience. And similarly, if you have a topic that you'd like to see represented on the agenda, or something that you heard today that you'd like to see amplified on, don't hesitate between now and the next meeting to convey those either in person or by email to our staff or to me to be relayed so we can get them on next month's agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. Is there a second? All right, it's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? So at 6:35 p.m. we are adjourned. Thank you very much.